The organ music stopped mid-note. 200 people turned to look at me all at once. Some had their mouths hanging open. Others pressed their hands to their chests like they had forgotten how to breathe. My white dress felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. My father stood beside me at the church entrance. His jaw was tight. His eyes were flat and cold. He had just said, loud enough for the first 4 rows to hear, that he refused to walk me down the aisle, that I was unworthy of the life I was marrying into. My future mother-in-law, Elaine, sat in the front row on the groom's side. She smirked, a slow, satisfied smirk she made no effort to hide. My fiancé, Derek, stood at the altar. He said nothing. He stared at the floor, waiting for someone else to fix the moment. I felt 12 years old again. Small. Invisible. Like I was back in my father's kitchen being told my dreams were too big for someone like me. But I was not 12 anymore. I straightened my shoulders. I lifted my chin. I told the officiant, in a clear, steady voice, that the ceremony would proceed. But I would not be walking alone. My name is Natalie Cole. I am 34 years old, born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina. I built my own construction company from scratch. If you are new here, please subscribe for more stories like this one. What happened next changed my entire life. To understand what my father did that morning, you need to understand who he had always been. Douglas Cole spent over 30 years as a project manager for a large construction firm in Charlotte. He knew the industry and the money inside it. From the time I was a little girl, he made it clear that construction was not a space designed for women. When I told him at 22 that I wanted to start my own firm, he laughed. Not a warm laugh. A sharp, dismissive sound I still hear sometimes in hard moments. You are playing businesswoman, he said. It is a cute idea. But you will come back to reality soon enough. I did not come back. I kept building. By 30, my company, Cole Built, had completed over 40 projects across North Carolina. We had a solid reputation and a growing team. But my success did not soften my father. It seemed to irritate him in ways I could not fully understand at the time. Then came Derek's family, the Hargroves. Old money, established names, deeply held opinions about who belonged at their table. They lived in a part of Charlotte where people who built things with their hands were hired help, not invited guests. Someone had been feeding them doubts about me. I just did not know who yet. The trouble had been building for months before the wedding. It started with small comments. My father called the venue too showy for someone at my level. He questioned the prenup discussions, saying they made me look suspicious. He even criticized the engagement ring, suggesting it was a bit too much. At first, I told myself fathers were like that. Protective. Hard to please. But then I noticed something strange. Elaine began saying almost the same things. Not similar things, the same things. Word for word sometimes. She called the venue a bit much. She raised concerns about the prenup. She asked Derek once, in front of me, whether the ring had been his idea or mine, with a tone that made the question feel like an accusation. I started paying close attention. The timing was always off in the same direction. My father would say something critical on a Tuesday. Elaine would echo it to Derek by Thursday. Or the pattern would reverse. They were coordinating. I was almost certain of it, but almost certain was not enough. I needed to know for sure. I found out 2 weeks before the wedding. It happened by accident, the way the most important things usually do. I stopped by my father's house to drop off some paperwork. The front door was unlocked, so I let myself in. His voice reached me before I reached the hallway. He was in his study. The door was halfway open. His phone was on speaker. The voice coming through it was unmistakably Elaine's. I stopped walking. She does not have the right background, Elaine said. My son deserves someone with real legacy. My father agreed, without hesitating. Natalie has money now, but no legacy. No foundation. She built a business, fine. But that is not the same as being the right kind of person. I stood in that hallway for a long time. They had been comparing notes for months, working together to quietly undermine me, not to protect Derek's future, but because they both needed to believe I was less than I was. I did not confront them. I closed the front door softly and walked back to my car. I sat there for a moment. Then I made a decision. I was done trying to earn my father's approval. It was time to prepare for something else. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time. There was a glass of water I never touched. A notepad I never wrote on. I just sat in the quiet, thinking about every person who had actually shown up for me, not when it was easy, but when it cost them something. One name came back every time. Coach Raymond Thompson. He had been my high school football coach, but that title barely captures what he meant to me. When my father decided I was not worth his time during my teenage years, too caught up in his career to notice me, Coach Thompson stepped in and filled the space. He drove me to college campus visits on his weekends. He sat in the front row at my first business pitch at 23. He answered my calls at 11 at night when I was 26 and ready to walk away from everything I had built. We had not spoken much in the past 2 years. Life had pulled us in different directions, but I still had his number. I picked up my phone and dialed. He answered on the second ring. I told him I might need him at my wedding, just in case. He did not even pause. "I will be there," he said. The night before the wedding, Derek came to my apartment. We were not supposed to see each other. Old tradition. But the knock at my door was slow and deliberate, and the way he stood in the hallway when I opened it told me this was not a romantic visit. I let him in. He sat on the couch and folded his hands like someone who had rehearsed something they were not sure they wanted to say. "Nat," he started. "Have you thought about waiting until your father is more comfortable with everything?" I looked at him carefully. Comfortable with what? With all of this? With the timing? With me? I said. He nodded without looking up. I asked the question I had been carrying for weeks. "Derek, do you believe what my father has been saying? That I am not the right kind of person for your family?" He looked at his hands. He did not say yes. He did not say no. He said, "It is complicated." That silence told me more than any direct answer could have. The man across from me had quietly let other people shape what he thought of the woman he was supposed to be marrying. I told him calmly I would see him at the church. Then I closed the door. Back in the church, after my father's refusal, the silence pressed in from every direction. He stood with his arms crossed, expressions set like stone. He expected me to crumble, to reach for him once more and quietly ask him, "Please, take your place beside your daughter and walk her where she needs to go." I did not crumble. I turned toward the main entrance at the back of the church and gave a small nod to the usher near the doors. The usher stepped aside. The double doors swung open, and in walked Coach Raymond Thompson. He was 61 years old and moved like a man who had never once doubted his own purpose. His navy suit was freshly pressed. He carried the kind of quiet authority that cannot be bought or rehearsed. When he saw me at the top of the aisle, he smiled. Not a nervous smile. A warm, certain smile that said everything. "I told you I would come." My father saw him at almost the exact same moment. The color left my father's face so fast it was like someone had pulled a plug. His arms uncrossed. His mouth opened slightly. Coach Thompson walked toward me without glancing at my father at all. Coach Thompson reached me and offered his arm without a single word. No speech to the crowd. No explanation. No pause for effect. He simply stood beside me, calm, solid, entirely certain, the way he had always been in every moment that mattered. Like this was the most natural thing in the world. Because for us it was. I took his arm, and we started to walk. For the first few steps, the church held its breath. I could hear my heels on the marble floor. I could hear someone near the middle of the room pull in a quiet, sharp breath. Then, from somewhere toward the back, a single pair of hands began to clap. Then 2 more. Then 5. Then the sound built slowly and steadily, like a wave moving toward the altar, until the whole room was clapping, not wildly, not theatrically, but with the kind of firm, unhurried applause that means something real. I did not look back at my father, but I felt him standing there at the entrance, smaller than he had ever been before. Not because anyone had attacked him, but because the room had simply moved on without him. I walked toward the altar with my head level. But the day was not finished with surprises yet. The ceremony began. Derek stood at the altar looking relieved, like the difficult part of the day was behind us, and now everything could fall back into the script. I watched his face as we said our vows. At first, he was looking at me, but slowly, his eyes began to drift. Not to the officiant, not to our friends, to my father, who had slipped into a seat in the very back row, and then to Elaine, sitting perfectly upright in the front. Derek's voice wavered slightly when he reached the part about choosing me above all others. It was small. Most people would not have caught it. I caught it. I also noticed that Elaine leaned toward the woman beside her and whispered something at almost the exact moment Derek's voice faltered. A cold thought settled quietly in my chest. They had not expected me to hold my ground at the entrance. They had planned for a different outcome, one where I was destabilized, humbled, desperate enough to accept whatever terms they quietly offered afterward. They had built their entire plan around one assumption. They had not planned for Coach Thompson. The reception was held in a banquet hall 2 blocks from the church. String lights overhead, white linen tablecloths, soft music underneath the sound of conversation. It was everything I had spent months planning. The first toasts were warm and full. Friends spoke. Derek's college roommate told a story that made the whole room laugh. I smiled and raised my glass and tried to hold on to the joy I had pictured for this day. Then my father stood up. He had not been scheduled to speak. He had no spot in the program. But he walked to the microphone with the confidence of a man who believes every room belongs to him. He spoke for 4 minutes. He talked about tradition, marriage, and the kind of character a husband needed to develop over time. He never said my name once. He ended by saying he hoped the marriage would bring out the best in both of us, with particular weight placed on Derek bringing something better out in me. Polite applause followed. Then Coach Thompson rose from table 3. He buttoned his jacket. He walked to the microphone and looked out across the room. And he said, "I would like to say a few words about who Natalie Cole actually is." Coach Thompson did not raise his voice. He did not point fingers or look for reactions. He simply told the truth in the calm, steady tone of a man who had nothing left to protect and nothing to prove. He told the room that when I was 18, accepted to the College of Design at NC State, my father had refused to contribute a single dollar. He said it was a waste of money for a girl who would eventually settle down and give up on grand ideas. Coach Thompson paid for my first 2 semesters himself. He never told me where the money came from until I was 25. That was the first thing he said. Then he told them about the business. He described the night I called him at 2 in the morning, 10 years ago, when Colebuilt was 6 months old and nearly finished. I had gone to my father that week asking for very little, just enough to cover payroll until a delayed payment arrived. My father said no, but he had told 3 people at his golf club that he was deeply involved in supporting his daughter's company. The room went completely still. I watched my father stare at the tablecloth in front of him, unable to decide where else to look. About an hour into the reception, Derek and Elaine slipped out through a side door near the kitchen. I gave it 5 minutes. Then I followed. I did not go in. I stood just outside the partially open door, where the sound carried clearly. Elaine spoke first. "You should have handled this months ago. I told you in October what was going to happen." Derek's response was too low to make out. "This is not what I raised you for," Elaine said louder. "I need to know you can manage her. She is not like us." Derek said, "She is my wife now, Mom. She is ambitious and unpredictable, and she refused to fall apart this morning when she was supposed to." I stepped back from the door and stood still in the quiet hallway. What I understood now was bigger than a controlling mother-in-law with class concerns. This was about power. Elaine had never objected to me because of my background. She objected because she could not manage me. And she had found the one person she believed could break my confidence before the wedding started, my own father, and used him deliberately as her instrument. Later, after the dancing had started and the lights had lowered, Derek found me near the far windows. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said he needed to tell me something about the prenup. I waited. He explained that his mother had hired a private attorney months earlier, without initially telling Derek, to draft prenup language that would protect Hargrove family assets. If our marriage ended within 5 years, the terms would have left me with very little of what we built together. She had presented this to Derek as standard, sensible, protective. He had nearly signed it. I let him finish. Then I told him something he did not know existed. 3 months before the wedding, when I first sensed what was being arranged around me, I had contacted my own attorney. I drew up my own prenup, one that clearly protected Cole-Built and every contract, asset, and piece of equipment tied to it from any outside claim. I had not brought it up because I had not wanted to start a fight before the day arrived. But it existed. It was notarized. And it was solid. Derek stared at me. "You knew," he said quietly. "I prepared," I said. "There is a difference." By 10 o'clock, the reception had started to thin. People were gathering jackets and taking photos. But before the evening ended, 3 longtime friends of my father approached me separately. The first, Arthur, shook my hand and said quietly, "Most of us always thought Douglas was too hard on you." The second, a retired contractor named Phil, told me he had once offered my father the chance to invest early in Cole-Built. My father had laughed off the idea without a second thought. "I wish I had ignored him," Phil said. "Your company is the real thing." The third man said something I have carried with me ever since. He leaned in and said, "Your father has never been disappointed in you, Natalie. He has been threatened by you." Those are completely different things. Disappointed people want you to do better. Threatened people want you to stop. I stood very still for a moment after he walked away. I had spent years believing my father's coldness was about my failure, about not measuring up to something he had quietly hoped for. Now I was beginning to understand it had never been about failure at all. It had always been about my success. That night, after Derek and I reached the hotel, I could not sleep. I lay in the dark, my thoughts circling back to one thing, my father's company. Douglas had run his own project management firm for 12 years. I had never followed its numbers closely. I had been too focused on building my own future. But Phil's comment had stayed with me. The next morning, while Derek slept, I opened my laptop and spent an hour pulling up public records and recent industry news about Douglas Cole Construction. What I found was not dramatic. No lawsuits. No scandal. But the pattern was unmistakable. His firm had lost 3 major contracts in 2 years. His team had shrunk from 20 employees to 9. The downtown Charlotte office he had held for a decade had been quietly moved to a smaller space outside the city. Meanwhile, Cole-Built had just signed the largest contract in our history, a mixed-use uptown development worth over $4 million. My father had not come to my wedding afraid I would fail. He had come intending to humiliate me because he was quietly terrified I had already won. I closed the laptop and looked at the ceiling for a long time. That was the piece I had been missing. Word travels fast at a wedding reception, even a polished and well-mannered one. By the time dessert was cleared and the band moved into their final set, something in the room had shifted. You could feel it, a change in tone, the way conversations had quietly turned, the shared understanding that something genuine had happened here tonight. People were no longer talking about the uncomfortable moment at the church entrance. They were talking about Coach Thompson's speech, about college tuition paid in secret, about a payroll crisis my father had refused to help with and then taken public credit for solving. I moved through the room slowly, thanking guests, accepting embraces. My father moved through the same room very differently. He had been working the crowd all evening, firm handshakes, practiced smiles, the easy confidence of a man who expected rooms to be glad he had shown up. But the responses had changed. Conversations ended a little faster. Smiles were thinner. People moved on sooner than felt entirely natural. My father kept adjusting his tie, a habit he had whenever things were not going his way. For the first time in my life, the story being told about our family was not the one he had written. I had not attacked him. I had simply stopped protecting him. It was past midnight when Derek and I finally had a real conversation. We sat on the small couch near the hotel room window. The lights were low. The noise of the evening had faded to nothing. For a while, we both just sat in silence. Then Derek said, "I am sorry I did not speak up at the church." I looked at him. "I knew what your father was planning," he continued. Not the exact words. But my mother mentioned the night before that things might get complicated at the entrance. I should have stopped it. I should have told him he was not going to do that. Why didn't you? I asked. He was quiet for a moment. Because I was afraid of letting both of them down at the same time. I thought I could manage it. Keep the peace. Derek, I said carefully, this marriage will only work if we are on the same side. Not your mother's. Not my father's. Ours. He met my eyes. I know that. Knowing is not enough, I said. It has to show up in what you actually do. Starting now. He reached over and took my hand. I let him hold it, but I was watching, waiting to see whether words would become something more. Before the hotel cleared out entirely, many guests gathered in the lobby bar for one last round. I had not planned to speak again. Coach Thompson had already said everything that needed to be said. But as I passed through on my way to the elevator, someone pressed the portable microphone into my hand and said the crowd was asking for a word from the bride. I looked around the room. Coach Thompson sat in a corner chair with a glass of water and the settled look of a man who had told the truth and found it lighter than the secret he had kept. Phil and Arthur stood nearby. Derek was a few steps to my left, watching me carefully. I raised the microphone. I said, I want to thank everyone tonight who showed up not because they were obligated to, but because they made a choice to. That is the only kind of presence that means anything. The only kind of love that actually holds. I looked at Coach Thompson. Family is not blood, I said. It is action. The room erupted. Somewhere near the main exit, I caught a glimpse of a navy suit moving quietly toward the door. My father left before the applause stopped. For days after the wedding, my father called. Derek and I were still in Savannah. A quiet honeymoon, long walks and slow meals and conversations more honest than anything we had managed before the ceremony. My father's name appeared on my phone screen on a Tuesday morning as I sat on the hotel balcony with coffee. I answered. He did not start with hello. He said, what you allowed at that reception was deeply embarrassing. I expect an apology. I set my cup down on the railing. I did not embarrass you, Dad, I said. I stopped protecting you. Those are two very different things. Silence. Everything Coach Thompson said in that room was true. I continued. You know it. I know it. The people in that room know it now too. I am not going to apologize for letting the truth into a space you had worked very hard to keep it out of. He said, you have always been ungrateful. I was grateful, I said. For a long time, I performed gratitude for things that never actually came. I stopped when there was nothing real left to be thankful for. He hung up. I picked up my coffee and looked out over the Savannah rooftops in the morning light. I felt remarkably, unexpectedly calm. Elaine made her move about 2 weeks after we returned from Savannah. She called Derek and invited us both to Sunday dinner. She wanted to clear the air, start fresh, put everything behind the family. She used the word miscommunication 3 times in under 2 minutes, which told me the call had been carefully rehearsed. I told Derek it was his choice. I would go if he wanted to, but I asked him to pay attention that evening, not just to what was said, but to what was being attempted. We went. Elaine was gracious and warm. The table was beautifully set. The food was wonderful. She talked about family and fresh starts. And then, very gently, she began steering the conversation. She raised small questions about decisions Derek and I had recently made together. Nothing dramatic. The apartment. His schedule. A project at Cole built she seemed to know more about than she should. Derek set his fork down. Mom, he said, Natalie and I make those decisions together. That is how it works. That is not going to change. Elaine blinked. She had not expected that answer. She recovered quickly and moved on to dessert. Derek caught my eye across the table. What I saw in his face was not the same man who had stared at the floor in that church. He was choosing differently now. 2 months after the wedding, Charlotte City Council announced a major public redevelopment bid. The project covered 12 acres of older commercial land on the east side of the city. The council wanted it transformed into mixed-income housing and community retail space. The contract was worth nearly $6 million. the most significant public construction bid Charlotte had put forward that entire year. Cole Built submitted a proposal. So did Douglas Cole Construction. I found out on a Thursday morning when my project manager flagged the full list of competing bids and circled my father's company name with a question mark beside it. I told her not to worry about it. We would do what we always did, build the strongest proposal possible, based entirely on our record, our team, and our plan for the community this project was going to serve. I did not call my father. I did not ask around about what he was submitting. I made no effort to find out who he knew on the selection committee. I had built Cole Built on one rule from the very beginning: let the work speak for itself. That rule had carried us to this point. I was about to find out whether it would hold up in a competition that had never truly been just about business. The bid process lasted 6 weeks. My team worked late evenings and weekends. We submitted a detailed plan that included community engagement sessions, a strong local hiring commitment, a phased construction timeline, and a cost structure that came in below the city's estimate without cutting a single corner. We were genuinely proud of it. I made one decision during those weeks that was harder than any of the technical work. When 2 colleagues told me they had heard my father was speaking negatively about Cole Built to people connected to the selection committee, I did not respond to it. One contact urged me directly to reach out and set the record straight. "You could dismantle him," she said. "Your track record is there. His is not." "I know," I told her, "but that is not how I want to win this." I refused to say a single negative word about Douglas Cole Construction. Not publicly, not privately, not professionally. Not even when the opportunity was sitting right in front of me. What my father chose to say about me was his business. What Cole Built delivered was mine. 6 weeks after the bids closed, the city made its announcement. Cole Built was awarded the contract. Unanimously. Based on merit, track record, and the quality of the proposal. Cleanly. Fairly. Without any shadow of doubt. The groundbreaking ceremony was held on a bright Tuesday morning in October. The site had been cleared and leveled. A platform with a podium and row of chairs for city officials stood near the center. A local television crew parked along the street. A reporter from the Charlotte Observer stood near the back with a notepad. The city council representative who introduced me called Cole Built a model of what Charlotte's next generation of builders looks like. She spoke about community investment, local jobs, and a company that had grown from a one-woman operation to a team of 43 in under a decade. I thanked my team. I thanked the city. I talked about what this project would mean for the neighborhood it was going to serve. I did not mention my father. But after the ceremony finished, and people were scattered across the lot with coffees and hard hats, I noticed a figure standing just beyond the crowd at the edge of the cleared site. Douglas Cole. Gray jacket. Standing alone. He had not been invited. He had not been announced. He was simply there. Watching. Our eyes met for just a moment across the distance between us. Then I turned back to my team and kept going. He approached me as the last guests were leaving. The TV crew had driven away. The reporter had folded her notepad. A few of my team members still stood near the groundbreaking sign taking photos. My father walked toward me slowly across the cleared ground. He looked smaller than I remembered. Not in height, he was still tall and broad-shouldered. But something central in his posture had quietly collapsed. The certainty was gone. We stood side by side for a moment without speaking, both looking out at the land that was about to become something permanent and real. Then he said, very quietly, "Why didn't you need me?" It was the most honest thing he had said to me in years. I turned and looked at him directly. "I did need you, Dad. I needed you at 18 when I was starting college. I needed you at 26 when I was about to lose everything I had built. I needed you to be proud of me without feeling threatened by me." I paused and let the words settle. "You chose not to be there. That was your choice. Not mine." He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He nodded once, small and slow. Then he turned and walked away across the empty lot without looking back. It has been almost 8 months since that groundbreaking morning. The East Side development is on schedule. My team shows up every day with the quiet pride that comes from doing work that genuinely matters. We have already brought in 41 local residents for construction jobs on this project. The community meetings before we broke ground were standing room only. Derek and I are doing the real, steady work of building something honest between us. Some weeks are harder than others. But the man who stared at the church floor and waited for someone else to handle a difficult moment is not the same man who interrupted his mother at her own dinner table and said, "We decide together. People can change. Slowly. Truly." I am watching it happen. My father's company officially downsized 2 months ago. 9 employees became 4. I read about it in a brief industry notice. I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet, heavy sadness for a man who could never stop competing long enough to simply rest. Elaine still calls. Derek answers. He is patient, but the lines are clear, and he holds them. And me? I no longer wait for my father to decide I am worthy. I stopped shrinking for him a long time ago. The man who once called me unworthy now introduces himself as the father of that developer. But I do not need the title anymore. I already know my own worth, and that is something no one will ever walk away from again.